Well, we're on part 2 of lesson 70, and we were talking about the kings of England. And it was kind of like being on a roller coaster ride, wasn't it? That ups and downs and turns. But now we're going to come towards the ending part. And can you imagine, have you ever been on like a ride that ended up in this body of water and you splashed down and then you just started swimming on this lazy river, kind of like a water slide? And this lazy river would go all the way and everything would seem kind of calm. That's the way this is going to be with the English history, and when we're talking about the kings of England. That's going to end up into this huge battle and this huge dip that we're going to go, what's going to happen next? And then splash down. And then the king, he's going to take over. And this king, there's going to be a time of peace and there's going to be a time of change. So see if you can guess who's going to be the next king of England. We ended up before with the king Edward III, which was the confessor, and he reigned for 20 years, but there was a big problem because when he died, he had no children. Now, just a clue before this. Let's think. Let's review. Edward III, confessor, was the son of Emma and Ethelred. We know that Ethelred was an older king, so Emma must have been a pretty young woman then. And then after Ethelred died, he's the one that fled to Normandy, and he wasn't so good, was he? But after he died, she married the Danish king Canute and had 2 children. And those 2 sons, I think she had more than 2 children, but 2 sons. And Canute's sons had reigned too, but very quickly. They each died like a year apart. And that's when Edward III, the confessor, her son, but from Ethelred, became king. So that's the craziness. But now, Ethelred is dead. Emma's probably long gone too. And we also have her son, Edward the Confessor, dying. And no one's left. So who would be king? Well, it was kind of weird because, there was a guy named Harold. And Harold, the Earl of Wessex. So you know that he's Anglo-Saxon. And he says he thinks possibly, he's the cousin. We don't know what he thought, but he thought he was a relative of Edward so that he would be the next king. The thing about Harold, the Earl of Wessex, is a lot of the English people wanted him because he lived in England and he was English, Anglo-Saxon. And also the Church of England there, they liked him, and all of the nobles thought, we can count on him. So he was very popular in England. But he had a brother, and his brother's name was Tausig. Can you think of Tausig? That's kind of weird anyway. Harold's brother, he thought, well, he could be king. If Harold could be king, well, he could be king. Well, the thing about Tausig is that Tausig lived up north in Scandinavia. He didn't even live in England, but he thought he could come in from the Viking Scandinavia and take over. Now think of Tausig. I don't think Tausig was a Christian. He just wanted to become power and have the power of England, I'm sure. So, and being his brother, it'd be really hard for brothers to fight. But guess what? They did that back then. Brothers fought in war. The other guy was William. And William, that was the Duke of Normandy, and he says that he is a relative. So we have William, the Duke of Normandy, and he's saying that he's a relative of Edward II. Now, Normandy's in the south, remember, in France. So he's not really in England either, but he claims that he's the descendant of the very legend of King Arthur. And he's all into being king. You can imagine this guy is charismatic, William. Now, we never had a William yet. We've had Harolds and all the E's, right? But William is going to come in, the Duke of Normandy, and he claims the rights of the the round table, and he wants to bring in knights, and he wants to start this all in England. So you do think there's going to be a fight? Yep. One of the most famous battles of all is called the Battle of Hastings. On every test of England, you're going to have to know the Battle of Hastings. And if you go into England now, they even react the Battle of Hastings. So it's a very important battle. Well, how does this battle come about? Well, let's give you a clue to the end. We have Harold, the unfortunate, and William, the conqueror. Just a clue. Who do you think's going to win the battle? Let's find out. So let's go over this quickly. This is going to be kind of like, oh, just imagine that you're right there and you're witnessing this great Battle of Hastings. The Battle of Hastings. Let's think, and let's think about how this battle came about. So here we have, there are three mixtures. We have the Anglo-Saxon, and that's in Harold. We have the Vikings from the north, the Norsemen, and that's Tausig. And then we have this French mixture of French in England and Danish, mainly Danish mixture in Normandy of William. And William being the very charismatic one. Charismatic means that everyone cheered him on like a hero, especially in Normandy. William, the Duke of Normandy, had married an English princess too. And so he thought now for sure that he would go and move back into England. He protested to Harold long before, saying, I am the heir of Edward, and you're not. And so they were fighting. There would be fighting, of course. So most of England, the people of England, they did not want a foreign king. They would rather be ruled by someone that was English there than having another king come from the north or from the south. And so they wanted to support Harold. Plus, William, he thought that Harold would not claim the throne, so it would be really easy for him. He thought that Harold was a weak ruler and that he probably falled apart, and so he thought he was a shoo-in, or that he was going to, and he thought that that was his destiny. He had dreams about that, his destiny. Now, he was Christian, but he also believed in a lot of weird omens and things like that. We'll find that out with William. So, this is earlier than the Battle of Hastings, it's an important part. William heard that Harold had been caught in a storm and that he had been blown off course, and he had been wrecked on the shores of Normandy. That's where William lives. So William said, oh, we're going to go rescue him. So William got some guys, and they went and they rescued Harold, and they gave him clothing and supplies, and they took care of his wounds and a few of his men that were with him. Then they gave Harold a huge feast. William did. He gave him a huge feast, and Harold would be the honored guest at the feast. It would be a huge celebration, and he would invite jugglers and acrobats to entertain them. They would have red and gold tablecloths and barbecued meat and plenty to drink. Harold was nervous because he knew William wanted to be king of England. At that time, Harold didn't think about being king because, Edward the Confessor was still alive. And so he just thought, well, whatever. But then he had this feeling that William might kill him. So he got even more nervous because he was in William's castle. William was the Duke of Normandy, and he was in his castle. And maybe William would just take him as a hostage. And sure enough, at the end of the feast, you wonder what happened. This is pretty dynamic. So William asked Harold to swear under oath to give him the kingdom. So he found this red tablecloth was underneath the table that they were eating at. This is kind of weird. He pulled off the tablecloth, and underneath were a lot of old relics. And what were these old relics? Well, they were like bones of saints. That's kind of weird. And just relics of the church and Bible. And so he said, now at this table, we're going to swear and under the oath right here that you are going to allow me, William, to be King of England. And if he didn't obey the oath, Harold thought, he'll surely die. William's going to kill me if I don't do this oath. So, he did the oath. He said the oath with witnesses. Harold did. And he made this oath on these relics, the relics of the church, and the oath he said to God. So that is really crazy. But it was under, if he didn't, he would think, he may not make it through the night. So, but guess what happened? William let Harold go home. And when he went home, the King of England, Edward the Confessor, died. The year was 1066, very important year. William sent messengers to Harold demanding his sacred promise. William said, you promised me. And Harold said, well, no way. So what if I did that oath? I'm going to be king anyway. So he said, I will be king. And so guess what the nobles did? They had a ceremony and they did make Harold a king, but just for a short time. The people were very nervous because William had told everyone about Harold's oath and the sacred promises and the relics, and people back then believed in bad omens, and they thought, oh, surely it's not going to work out very well with Harold as king. And then what happened? The spooky thing, they had a comet. It was Halley's Comet that had come in, and the sky was filled with this magnificent comet. And to them back then, that was a bad omen for England. They thought, surely Harold's not going to be king. Something is going to happen. They thought something bad was going to happen. And as they went on, that comet, William's army started to be on its way. And William's plan was very crafty. Even Harold's soldiers were afraid of Harold not following that oath. The soldiers were like, I don't think we're going to win this war because of those dead bones. And then it got even worse. You know what I told you before? Let's see, what's his name? Tausig. Tausig comes down. Tausig decides, hey, my brother's king, I'm going to kill him and I'm going to become king. How bad is that? He wants the throne. Tausig wants the throne too. So he is coming from the north to attack Harold's men, while William is coming from the south to attack Harold's men. Harold's army has to fight off Tausig first and the Viking warriors. And so you can imagine fighting those Viking warriors. Well, Harold's army does win, and Tausig is killed. But they are totally exhausted. William's army is fresh and alive. He is leading the army, and William is courageous, claiming he's the descendant of King Arthur himself. He is charismatic. That means everyone loves him. Even some of the English did. And all of his soldiers are cheering him on. The people are cheering too. But Harold's army outnumbers William's. But they are weary and tired, and they haven't got much sleep. So they decide to go on top of this hill and rest. And usually no army would attack going uphill. So they thought they'd be safe on top of that hill, resting. With all of that armor and stuff that they had, what army would try to run up a steep hill to attack their warriors? That never happens. But the Normans, William decided to charge uphill at the Battle of Hastings. William thought they would surely win. October 14th, 1066. Remember that date, October 14th, 1066. A historic moment. The Battle of Hastings happened. Harold, the newly anointed Anglo-Saxon king, and William, the Duke of Normandy, leading. The fight was ferocious. The first thing, William was knocked off his horse. Can you imagine that? He gets knocked off his horse. And he was running uphill with his horse, and then all of a sudden, here they come, they knock him off his horse, and then they look and he's laying on the ground, and the English say, "Wow, the Duke is dead! We won! We won the war!" They were all excited, but not really. What happens next is William yanks off his helmet, he's on the ground, and he yells at the top of his voice, "Look, guys, I'm still alive, and yes, by the grace of God, I will conquer." This excited the Norman soldiers, William's guys. They fought with all of their might. They ran uphill at top speed. They weren't even tired. They surrounded Harold's troops, who were not expecting them to do this. And then King Harold was killed. The English surrendered right away when the king was killed. They still thought, yeah, it's a bad omen fighting William, so it was an easy surrender. And they surrendered to the Duke of Normandy. The Duke of Normandy, William, was made King of England. Harold, he was buried with purple robes, and people named him Harold the Unfortunate. He didn't reign very long, less than a year. In fact, Harold the Unfortunate is still carved on his tombstone. Harold the Unfortunate. William was given a new name, King William the Conqueror, and he was crowned king on Christmas Day. Now England would be submitted and controlled by French-speaking Vikings. Well, not really. You see, these Vikings had become Christians and very civilized, in fact. This would be the last successful invasion of Great Britain. Now, the Norman French would now rule from 1066 to 1087. But they would be fair to the Anglo-Saxon Jutes and Danes and Celtics and all, and they all would kind of melt together into one England. And William, he would bring back the days of King Arthur with the knights in the armor. The time of the Crusades would bring an amazing time of chivalry and all these things. Can you imagine? Yes, things would change in England under William the Conqueror, King William the Conqueror. Wow. To me, it's quite a story, but it doesn't even compare to the King of Kings and Lord of Lords we have in Jesus Christ. That no king on earth can stand as we are going to stand with Jesus in the end times, because Jesus is the only fair king, the only king, the King of Kings that loves us with such an amazing love, agape love, a love that goes the distance. So this story, yeah, it ended up in a splash with the Battle of Hastings, and now we're going to be floating on the lazy river just for a few years, though.